Hello there, everybody. This is Alan Blumkin on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We're doing our Tuesday night podcast on basketball at the old Madison Square Garden in Nedick. I am your host tonight, and our guests tonight are Hal Bock, who is a prolific sports writer who is a regular on this program, and Mike Carey, who is the author of a new book on the former Providence and St. Louis Spirits forward, Marvin. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you guys.
Now, Ralph indicated in his post today he wanted to change this to include football and hockey. I'm not competent to do hockey. Well, the only thing I knew about hockey as a kid was that the Rangers stunk and Montreal was winning every year.
No, you got to broaden your outlook, Alan. Come on.
Many a night I spent outside the players' interest getting autographs from Gump Worsley and Harry Howell and the whole Louis Fontenato and the whole crew.
Yeah, my first job out of college, I worked for the Rangers, and those guys were that was the team, 1962, 63, and there were some great guys. We were talking today with some people. Gump Worsley was the goaltender, and one writer asked him, "What team gives you the most trouble?" And Gump, who was always very honest, said the Rangers, which was a pretty funny line.
Yeah.
Well, he would face 40, 50 shots a night, and he
absolutely, and without a mask, by the way.
Without a mask, and they might lose 5-3, but the guy would have 46 saves, and I thought he was a great goalie.
Yeah,
that was the time. That was the era of the 6-team league.
Yeah,
there were only 6 teams in the league at that time. The Rangers and Bruins, the Red Wings and Blackhawks, and 2 Canadian teams, the Maple Leafs and the Canadians. And the Rangers and the Bruins annually would battle it out for the 4th playoff spot, which is the last playoff spot. And they made it one year. I was working for them, and they had Doug Harvey as the player coach. He had come over from Montreal, a great defenseman at Montreal, his Hall of Fame defenseman. And he was the player coach in his last year or two as a player. And they made it to the playoffs that year. They were the 4th place team. But you mentioned some of the players, Mike. Harry Howell was just the sweetest gentleman you could imagine. And Rod Gilbert came up at that time, and Rod became a good friend of mine. He brought along John Rattel, and slowly but surely that team evolved into a real contender. And they played for the Cup a couple of times. They were an excellent team in the 70s. They had some really good players. Brad Park was a defenseman. But when I got there, when I went to work for them, they were kind of a ragtag team, and they could not compete with, as Alan mentioned, the Canadians, who, that was an awesome team that they had Jean Beliveau and Boom Boom Geoffrion, who later came to the Rangers and became a coach of the Rangers, and Rocket Richard and his brother Henry Richard. It could go on and on. That was a great era in hockey, a 6-team league. Now, of course, they have 30 teams, and I can't tell you any of the players, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, for a young kid growing up, in New York, I can remember getting online and with a GO card and racing up 6 flights of stairs to get one of the first 2 rows in the side balcony, and I fell in love with the sport. And
it was a great building, also the old Garden.
Yeah, it was. While I was a young kid getting autographs, my father was sitting in Nedick waiting for me to show up so he could go home. But I loved it, and then I honestly feel that my enthusiasm for the Rangers led me to pursue hockey, and I actually played in the Metropolitan League for the Brooklyn Kings.
Okay, that's good. Sure. That was a time when hockey was really starting to get a foothold, and my son played hockey here on Long Island at a place called Skateland, which was the workout facility that the Rangers used. And
right.
Every so often he played with Ed Jockman's children. His two sons, David, I know, was one. I don't recall the other boy's name, but that was really exciting for him. You know, it was like rubbing shoulders with the big leaguers.
Yeah, we might have played in the same league because I played a lot at Skateland, and the guy that ran the league was Bill Chadwick, the old NHL ref.
I'm proud to say that I wrote a book with Bill Chadwick, Hall of Fame referee, and what a wonderful guy he was. And one of my first books was called The Big Whistle, and it was Chadwick's autobiography, essentially.
Yeah, and a great guy, just very good with kids, and very patient, and I learned a lot from him at a young age.
Do you know that Bill Chadwick, who was a great referee, perhaps the model for refereeing in those days, the number one referee in the league, he had one eye. He had lost an eye in a hockey accident. A puck hit him in the eye when he was a kid, and he refereed all those years with one eye. Which is pretty
I was not aware of that.
Yes, he was. He was blind in one eye.
And one of my few ventures, I read about a year ago. I read the autobiography of Gordie Howe.
A great player. I mean,
he always
the greatest player of the league.
Went into the training camp, even when he became a superstar, with the idea that he was fighting for his job.
Well, he did a lot of fighting. I mean, he had a sharp elbow.
Oh yeah, well, I can tell you about his elbow because after I left the Rangers, I went to work for the Associated Press, and I covered hockey. And so I would go into the Red Wings dressing room one night, and Gordie was already in his later years as a player. I mean, he had been around for a while. And I had the audacity to say to him, "You think about retirement at all?" And he got up and he gave me an elbow in the ribs. And I thought, that's not friendly. That wasn't a friendly thing to do, you know. But I felt it, I'll tell you, for a few days afterwards, because he had sharp elbows.
Yeah. People did not like playing against them or having to shadow them.
Montreal didn't win. They usually won.
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
The Red Wings were the other good team. And it was a very exciting time in hockey because you knew all the players. You automatically knew the rosters. There was no confusion. The same 17 guys were coming into the building each year. Each time they came in, they were the same 17 guys. And so you got to know all of the players pretty much. I don't mean know them in terms of friendliness, but know who was going to be on the ice each night.
Yeah,
I worked in the PR department at the Garden, and our office was on the fourth floor, the fifth floor, whatever it was. And we had a door in the office, and you opened the door, and we were right into the arena. And I thought, what a marvelous office to have. What's a better office than that? To open the door and you're inside Madison Square Garden, and you're looking down on the court or the ice or whatever. So it was a great time in my life. I remember it dearly.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you as far as familiarity goes. I mean, a lot of teams, when I first started following hockey and going to the games, they only had the one goalie. You had the emergency goalie for each team. But, so when you went to a Detroit game against the Rangers, you knew Terry Sawchuk was going to be the goalie.
That's right.
And you pretty well knew the whole lineup, and you knew which guys were likely to get in a fight and which guys were likely to score, and it was great.
There was a certain familiarity that was comfortable about watching those games.
It's the same thing with the NBA in those days, because for most of that time there were only 8 teams, or 9 teams, or 10 teams, and you knew everybody. Now, like hockey, there's 30 teams, and you can look at the lineups of some teams. You don't know anyone.
That's true. That is true.
Gentlemen, I'm Ralph Tyko. I'm sorry for the delay. I'm having Comcast problems.
Okay, Ralph, I clicked in as the host.
I know you did, and I'm grateful that you did. Welcome, Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you.
You all introduced yourselves, and Mr. Bock, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Ralph. We have a week to go before my new book comes out.
I have it already.
And will be published on the 21st of February.
Yeah, I have it.
That's exciting.
How exciting is that? That is an exciting. Now, give me some numbers. I'm talking to people that I have the most prolific, as a group, the most prolific baseball sports book writers in. I have you, Peter Golenbach, David Nedick. How many books for you, Mr. Bock?
Band will be my 16th book.
Whoa.
Not all baseball, but a lot of them were baseball.
A lot of them. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And you guys, because I produce this thing on the fly, you're happy with expanding our horizons and renaming the show, talking hoops, football, hockey from Nedick's. How's that?
Well, you're a little late to the show today. We've been talking hockey for the last 10 minutes or so. So it's
good.
Fine by me.
It seems to be. I thought it would be.
Both Hal and
Blumkin,
Mike,
no objections?
Both Hal and Mike are much more versed in that than I am.
Okay, well, we all use each other's talents, and times you talk hockey, you guys talk. I remember the old days. I came in just as you were saying. It used to be 8 teams, and now it's 30, and it's impossible to take care of.
Yeah, the NBA is like that. The hockey was 6 at the 30.
No, that's what I meant. The
Yeah.
NBA, you guys were talking the NBA a few moments ago.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. Now it must be 30 teams.
Yeah.
And
hockey is 30 teams also.
Right.
Listen, I grew up at a time when baseball had 2 leagues and 8 teams in each league.
16, yeah.
That's a total of 16 teams. It's doubled in size since then. So it's a different world.
But I'm gonna say something. Most people would say, well, the talent is depleted with 30 teams involved. But I say that because of international competition, guys from Cuba, Dominican Republic, this, that, and the other thing, the talent has maintained itself. If you don't factor in the sharp drop-off of African Americans playing, for one reason or another.
They're all playing basketball and football. The African American population migrated to basketball and football. Now, why that is, I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Alan has a theory about that, because we hit on that in a show way back.
Yeah, I think one of the big reasons is that with basketball and football, there's no minor leagues. It's not like baseball. You generally have to do a 3 or 4 year apprenticeship in the minors before you come to the majors. The college feeds both pro football and pro basketball.
Right. They act as a minor league. Had you start your book, what made you, Mr. Carey, to get off the subject a little bit, and I hope you guys, I'm not repeating myself here, what made you, Bad News Barnes was kind of a cult hero in New York. What drew you to him?
Well, I had known him, I first met him in prison, actually. He had violated terms of his probation. He had pleaded guilty to an assault on a teammate, and as a result, he got 3 years probation, and then he broke the terms of the probation, so he had to serve a 4-month sentence, and one of his college teammates said, you know, you ought to do a story on this guy because he's not a bad guy. And I ended up getting the transcripts of both his criminal case and the civil suit that was filed against him for $1.5 million. And when I read the civil suit, which was the only case that ever went to a jury, I was convinced that he didn't hit his teammate with a tire iron. And the jury came to the same conclusion because Barnes said he hit his teammate with a fist, and Convertis maintained that it was a tire iron. In the civil suit, two doctors got up and said, you know, there's no way that he hit him with a tire iron and caused such minor damage. And the jury agreed, and they awarded Larry Convertis, his teammate, just $10,000, which basically covered his medical expenses. And the reason they awarded him that was because Barnes admitted that he did hit the guy with a fist. So all the punitive damages, which was $1.4 million, Convertis got zero. And Barnes was totally uncooperative with me. As I say, I had to do it all off the transcripts. And once the story came out, I got a call from him, and he had 10 times I had called him, and 10 times he refused to talk to me. And the day after the story ran, I got a call, and the guy said, "This is Marvin." And I said, "Oh, how are you?" And he said, "Well, I think you did a fair job with the story." And I said, "Well, thank you." And he rambled on, and he was humorous, and he, you know, didn't come off as a thug, which I had this preconceived notion that he was. And he while he was in prison, he would call me collect and just talk about growing up in Providence in the ghettos. And he finally said, "Why don't you come up and visit with me?" And I did, and I liked the guy. And what I found in writing his biography is that all his teammates, with the exception of Larry Convertis, through college and into the pros, they all liked the guy. I mean, he was a con man. He violated every team regulation you could think of, but coaches and players, they all loved the guy. And probably because of his personality. He just was always smiling, always joking, and he had a love for kids. He had such a bad upbringing. You know, his father was an alcoholic and just beat up on him, his sister, and his mother. And they didn't have any money, and so when he grew up, I mean, Marvin he would sneak 10 kids into a game, and after the game, he would give them each enough money to buy a pair of basketball shoes or a basketball, and he'd do this on a regular basis. He'd give free clinics for kids, and every coach that I talked to, Larry Brown, UV Brown, Bob McKinnon, who was his coach at St. Louis, they all loved the guy. I mean, Marvin gave these coaches some real headaches, but bottom line is they just liked him as a person, and teammates too. I mean, I just didn't run into guys that said, "Oh, he was a jerk."
How nice that you're clearing up misconceptions, because all we think about is, as you say, your preconceived idea about the guy. He was a thug, Marvin, that kind of thing. So I'm so glad that he isn't, and we're learning. I'm learning. Let's put it that way. I don't know how much Mr. Bock and Mr. Blumkin knew about it. But I thank you for writing that book, for that.
Well, You know, he
no
was,
other reason.
What gets lost in all of Marvin's craziness is the fact that he was an extraordinary talent. He broke and still holds every single record at Providence College for rebounds and block shots. And he did it in only 3 years.
Jim Hadnot's record, wasn't it? Jim Hadnot at Providence?
I think that came afterward.
Okay.
But
like that.
I mean, he was an incredible talent. He led the country in rebounding as a senior. And in the NBA draft, it was Bill Walton taken first by Portland, and then Marvin was taken by Philadelphia. And Philadelphia made a very good offer to Marvin, but Bob Wolf was his agent, and Wolf steered him to the St. Louis Spirits. And I think the sole reason for it was that the contract sounded good to Marvin. It was $7.2 million for 7 years. But the problem was there was 7 years of deferred money. So when you calculated it, Marvin was only making $150,000 a year, and his lifestyle he was spending way more than that. So from the very get-go, Marvin was having financial problems, and he happened at the end of his first year, and it was an incredible year. He averaged 24 points, 15 rebounds, was Rookie of the Year over Bobby Jones and Moses Malone, and people were predicting huge things for Marvin. In the playoffs, the ABA playoffs, the Spirits faced the Nets with Julius Erving, and the Nets were defending champs, and the Nets had beaten the Spirits 11 straight times in the regular season. So it looked like the Nets were just going to coast by the Spirits. And Marvin had an incredible series against Julius Erving and the Nets.
Paultz, too. I think he outplayed Paultz that series, if I remember correctly. Maybe
he did.
Paultz came later. He did?
No, he outplayed. He certainly outplayed Erving because he guarded Erving a lot defensively, and he outscored him, he out-rebounded him, he had a better field goal percentage, and I think he had 8 more blocks than Julius did. And Julius said, I played in my entire career, I played in 13 losing playoff series, and this one was the most disappointing. And the Nets just couldn't, they couldn't handle Marvin. They double-teamed him, they triple-teamed him, and, unfortunately, it was the apex of Marvin's career because after his first year, he got involved with, he met a gangster in St. Louis, and he became part of that gang, and it led to drug use, and by the end of his second year, he was addicted to cocaine, and he was using it on a regular basis. And the ABA merged with the NBA, and Marvin ended up with the Detroit Pistons, and the Pistons thought it was a great fit because they had Bob Lanier at center, and they really didn't have a power forward. And that, even though Marvin played center for the Spirits, his true position was power forward. He was only 6'8", and 6'8", 220, and he could run like a deer. So the Pistons really thought this was going to be an ideal front court, and by then Marvin just he had lost 30 pounds in weight, and he was more concerned with using cocaine and partying than he was with playing basketball. And for the rest of his career, which only went another 4 years, he treated basketball like it was a casual hobby, and for a guy that had so much potential, it was really a shame to watch this guy. I mean, he'd have tremendous games. Every once in a while, he put together a 35-point, 20-rebound game. But they were they were
few and far between.
Few and far between. And,
Did he get to save any of his bucks?
No. It all went for drugs. He settled with the spirits that, they owed him a ton of money, and he settled for 5 cents on the dollar for his deferred money just to get drug money. He at one point, he called the NBA and said, "Can I take a lump sum settlement on my pension money?" And they said, "Well, it wouldn't be a smart thing to do because you'd only get $40,000, and you could make that if you waited until age 45, you could make that money in 2 years of collecting a pension." And Marvin needed the money so badly for living and for drugs that he took the lump sum settlement, and he tried to get straight. In the book I make a point of saying that 22 times he entered rehab to get straight and sober, and 22 times he failed to achieve his goal. It was really sad. And again, my relationship with Marvin, we talked a lot, but it was on the phone. When he got to be 55, 56, he moved back to Providence, and he managed to get sober. He did that through John Lucas's rehab in Houston, and he started a foundation for kids, and it was a Scared Straight type program, and it got tremendous praise from the media, and I really thought that he had turned the corner. And his Providence College honored him by retiring his uniform number, and I really, everything was going great for the guy. At one point he had been sober for 6 years, and he fell off the wagon, but he recovered, and he called me up and said, "I need a place to stay. Can I come up and stay at your house?" And I said, "Yeah, as long as you know the rules: no drugs and no booze." And for 4 years he lived at my house, and straight and sober, and I had no problems with Marvin. He'd go down to Providence, work with the kids, and he'd come back. He was a funny guy, and we'd go to Celtic games, and I found him to be, as everybody else did, just a great guy. But then he got in trouble with the law. He was teaching one of his classes, and this young girl, 17 years old, walked down the corridor, and Marvin said, "Oh, you look like a model." And she said, "Well, that's what I want to be." And he said, "Well, I have some connections in the industry. Maybe I can help you out in furthering your career." Well, the girl went to the cops and said that he was sexually harassing him, and the cops filed charges against him. And the case dragged on for a year and a half, and it was postponed either by the prosecution or by his own lawyers. And with each postponement, I could see that it was just tearing him apart. And he would tell anybody that was willing to listen that this was a setup. That and I sort of believe that it certainly might have been, because I read the police transcripts, and the girl admits that she Googled his name and found out that he was a former NBA player. And I talked to the girl's father, who said he did not want to file these charges. But the mother and the girl ended up filing them, and it tore Marvin apart. And he was totally depressed, He wouldn't come out of his room for days at a time. And then I was taking out the garbage one day, and it weighed about 80 pounds, and there was newspapers on top of it, and I pulled the newspapers off, and there was just probably 70 cans of beer. And I just knew what was coming next, and I said, Marvin, you can't drink beer. You know, and he had been going to AA faithfully, and I just knew it was a bad sign. And about a week later, I came home, and his car was actually up on the lawn. He had missed the driveway by a good 4 or 5 feet. The door, the passenger door, the driver's door was open, and I looked in, and Marvin was passed out behind the wheel. And it took me about 5 minutes of shaking him to get a response from him, and it scared the hell out of me. And I finally confronted him, and I said, Marvin, I know you're using drugs. And I said, you know, either check into rehab or find another place to stay. And he did check into rehab. But when he got through with rehab, he decided he was going to go home and live with his mother for a while. And I didn't hear from him for 4 months, and then I got a call. And Marvin said, Mike, I'm going to court on Monday. This was a Thursday. And he said, I'm going to court on Monday. Can you come down and give me a little moral support? And I said, yeah, I'll be down. And I drove down to Providence from Boston, and I get in the courthouse, and I find out what courtroom the case is being heard in. And I went up and no Marvin. And so I went outside the building, and I called his cell, and it went straight to voicemail. And I said, well, he probably overslept, which was, you know, a typical Marvin stunt. So it didn't surprise me that he wasn't there. I just figured he had screwed up once again. So I got in my car, and I started to head back to Boston, and I got a call from his ex-wife saying that they had found him dead in bed. And I didn't, as much as it shook me up, I sort of knew what had happened. I didn't have to ask her, did he have a heart attack or anything like that. And of course, 3 months later, the coroner ruled that he had died from acute heroin and cocaine intoxication. And a large part of my book is devoted to addiction. And Marvin and a teammate of his, Gus Gerard, who was a heck of a player himself, went down the same path for 20 years. The difference is that Gus Gerard was able to turn his life around and became a addiction counselor, and never touched drugs again. Marvin I just watched those drugs destroy a person, and it was just sad to see. And at one point in my relationship with Marvin, I called a DEA agent that was a friend of mine, and I said, this is off the record, but what can I do to help this guy? And he said, well, offer him support, offer him encouragement, but don't give him a nickel. And he said, unfortunately, the only time an addict can get help is when they hit rock bottom. And in Marvin's case, rock bottom was death. And the book does not have an uplifting ending, but all too common with addiction, there are quite a few, sad endings, and Marvin was one of them.
Mike, how old was Marvin when he died? 62
years old. 62, and to be honest with you, the last, as I say, for the last year of his life, he was self-destructing, and in the end, I still question whether he was on a suicide mission, because he was doing nothing to help himself, and he was depressed every day. It wasn't the Marvin that I knew, and it wasn't the Marvin that his friends knew. He was, there was no joking around. There was no, just no life in the guy. I mean, he was just, he was, again, I had a garage that was converted into an in-law apartment that I gave him to use, and he would just sit in that damn room for 24 hours a day, with the exception of going to the bathroom, and he didn't eat. His weight had to go down to at least 170, maybe less. He looked terrible.
Yeah, for a big guy, that's Kenny Sears' weight.
Yeah, I mean, nothing fit. None of his. He threw out all his clothes because nothing fit, and it was just sad to watch. I mean, he didn't want help. I tried everything to, Marvin, why don't you go to outpatient? He was determined not to go to inpatient rehab. I said, why don't you go to outpatient rehab? And he went for 2 days, and he came home, and he was literally bouncing off the walls. And I said, Marvin, what are you doing? And he said, I just had a Valium to relax. And I said, Marvin, you can't. Drugs in you are poison. I mean, you can't be taking that stuff. And I knew he was giving up. I just saw it coming. And when he decided to check himself into rehab, inpatient rehab, I was a happy guy because I said, maybe they can reach him. And he completed the program. He stayed in rehab for 30 days, and which was the term of his program. And then he went down to stay with his mother, and it just didn't work out because he left his mother's place, and I don't even know the guy whose apartment he was staying at. I know most of Marvin's friends, and I just don't know this guy. But somehow, some way, Marvin was able to get a hold of cocaine and heroin, and it's just a shame. I mean, 5 o'clock in the morning, and the guy comes in, and I don't know who the guy is. I've never talked to him, and he can't wake up Marvin. He calls the EMTs, and by the time the EMTs get there, he's dead. And
it's remarkable, given that his adventures, that he lived to be 62. I mean, he was a candidate to die at 42, I would think.
He was. He really was.
Speaking of dying at 42, there was a kid that played at Rhode Island. His name was Artie Stevenson. He was a great rebounder. I think he still holds Rhode Island records. And he and I went to the Y together at age 10. And he was a great athlete. And he died. I picked up the Sporting News when I was 42, 30-some-odd years ago, 28 years ago. And Artie's dead. And I never found out how he did die, if it was drugs. It was a drug era. Anyway, that's...
Yeah, I mean, it was, you or I had, Lamar Odom for a while, for a little bit.
Hey.
I remember Marvin coming home and saying, geez, you know who I bumped into? Lamar Odom. And I said, Marvin, stay away from that guy. Because Lamar Odom had already had his drug problems were well publicized, and I didn't want Marvin hanging around the guy. I mean, I thought that was just if he did, I knew what was coming next, and but you can't, again, I mean, it was up to Marvin, and he just, I mean, Marvin would say, I'm a soldier, I got to fight this every day. He said all the right things, but he couldn't back them up with his actions. I mean,
right.
It was just.
What was he like before drugs? I mean, could you elaborate? You say he's a happy guy, and what made him laugh? What was a typical day with him like?
One of his college teammates said,
good.
Yeah, I mean, one of his college teammates, a guy named Fran Costello, he said, the thing about Marvin, he has a great sense of humor, and he doesn't mind making fun of himself. I mean, Marvin would come into a game, and there'd be 8 women behind him, and he'd escort them all to the front row. And then during the game, there was one game against William and Mary, and Providence was killing them, and Marvin's doing the alley shuffle in the lane, and he walks over to the girls and, hey, how's News doing today? And he had like 35 points when he's asking the question to his little contingent of fans, and and Dave Gavitt was his coach, got a real kick out of Marvin. I mean, Marvin kept everything light, and Gavitt, just you could see that Gavitt really liked Marvin. There was one time the team was going into the Palestra, and as they're walking in, there's a machine on the court that's a rebounding machine, and it's bouncing balls off the backboard, and players are trying to get the rebound. And Gavitt looked over at Marvin. Marvin was mesmerized by this machine. He said, Coach, we ought to get one of those. And Gavitt just shot back. He said, Marvin, we already have a rebounding machine. You. and Marvin was, when he was with St. Louis, Bob McKinnon was the coach, and at one time Marvin showed up late, and Marvin was driving a Bentley, and he was driving a Rolls Royce, and he shows up late, and McKinnon says, Marvin, where you been? And he said, my car broke down. I had to wait to get it fixed. And McKinnon said, well, aren't you driving a Rolls? And Marvin said, yeah, but they don't make them like they used to. And McKinnon just looked at him. He said, Marvin, I don't think the Rolls people make too many lemons. And McKinnon would let it slide. I mean, McKinnon knew how to handle Marvin, and there were just so many. He
knew how to choose his battles carefully.
Yeah. And I guess the classic Marvin story is the team was playing a game in Louisville and then flying back to St. Louis. And Marvin looks at the itinerary, and he turns to Bob Costas, who was the play-by-play guy for the Spirits. And he says, Bob, he says, something's wrong with this itinerary. It has us landing 2 minutes before we take off. And Costas goes, no, Marvin, that's correct. We're going from Eastern to Central Time. We gain an hour. And Marvin goes, bro, I don't know about you, but I ain't getting on no damn time machine.
Was he bright or he was kidding with that, of course, but was he exceptionally bright?
I think he was. I think he was. He got his degree, but he had street smarts, that's for sure. I mean, he you couldn't put one over on Marvin because he was too busy putting one over on you. He just had that personality that, you had to like the guy. I mean, like I said, I mean, all the teammates that I interviewed, they all loved the guy. He just was and he certainly, he had a habit of showing up late for practices. He missed planes, but all was forgiven with Marvin because he'd come in and make up some ridiculous excuse that the coach and his teammates would know is a lie, but it sounded so ridiculous that people just said, "Oh, that's Marvin," and he got away with an awful lot of stuff, and that was him. A tremendous sense of humor.
Well, that could be good for you and bad for you in the long run.
And you're right, and I think it, in the end, I mean, Marvin had a list of people that he could call, and he'd call them and say, can you lend me $200? I got car problems. And then he'd go on. If the guy said no, he'd say, oh, okay, I understand. And then he'd go on to the next guy. And he'd always find somebody that was willing to give him money. Ozzie Silna, who was the owner of the Spirits, funded his foundation when Marvin started up his foundation and for kids in Providence. And, when Marvin fell off the wagon, Marvin was calling Ozzie Silna and making up these phantom projects that, I want to run a basketball league, Ozzie. Can you send me a couple grand so I can get it started? And Ozzie would do it. And finally, Marvin's sister, who was a recovered addict, got a hold of Ozzie Silva's phone number and called him and said, Ozzie, I know you mean well, but don't believe what Marvin's telling you. It's all bull. He's using the money for drugs, and all you're doing by sending him the money is enabling him. And it really hurt Ozzie Silva because Ozzie was a tremendous person and really loved Marvin. And it took that, Ozzie finally confronted Marvin and said, I know what you're doing. I can't believe you're doing this to me, who's been so good to you. And for 2 years, they didn't talk. And then finally, Marvin called Ozzie and, and basically apologized. And Ozzie forgave him. And again, 2 years had gone by, but Ozzie agreed to restart the foundation. And that's where I came in, is when he restarted the foundation, Marvin decided that he had to move out of Providence, and he called me. And for 4 years, that foundation did some remarkable work with kids, and I have a number of stories, success stories, from the kids talking, not Marvin talking, but the kids talked to me and told me what a great influence he had been in their lives. And, unfortunately, it all unraveled when he was charged with sexual harassment by the police.
Now, this was an underage woman. Did that have anything to do with it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So she accused him of some stuff that had nothing to do with it?
She accused him basically, the final charge was solicitation. And solicitation of a minor, 17 years old. In Rhode Island, the age is 17, not 16. Right. So had he been found guilty, he would have had to register as a sex offender. And this tore him apart because that would the day that the charges was filed, the school system where Marvin conducted his classes, which was called the Men to Men program, where Marvin brought in policemen, judges, ex-convicts to talk to these kids, and it got some fantastic publicity in the Providence Journal and on TV, and everything was going great. But once the day the charges were brought, the school where it was being held dropped the program. Marvin was fired from his position, and he was lost. He was a lost soul. I mean, he was fearful that, but I'd hear him on the phone. He'd say, this is a setup. I swear to God, this is a setup. I asked the girl if she needed help in her modeling career, and he had a girlfriend, a 50-year-old woman, who was a former model, and he had talked to this woman about helping this girl. So I sort of believe him. I don't think it was. I know the women that Marvin went out with, and none of them were young girls. I just didn't believe this story, and we'll never know because it never went to court. But I just didn't believe it. It just wasn't the Marvin that I know.
Well, the key thing you said, the father did not want to file charges. And under normal circumstances, you would think it would be the father who's the most offended by accusations like that. So that gives me an indication that they were just trying to get some bucks.
Well, I read the police transcripts, and Marvin. The questions that were asked of Marvin, he just answered, this is ridiculous. I didn't do this. I was helping this girl, and he even had some modeling magazines in his car when they arrested him that had pictures of his 50-year-old girlfriend, that Marvin was going to show this girl. And, I just don't believe, I don't believe it, but, they were not, for a year they tried to reach a plea agreement or, anything that would stop them from going to court because, Marvin said, if I'm found guilty, I can't work anymore. I have to register as a sex offender, and this whole thing is a setup. And he refused to. There were a couple times where plea agreements were talked about, and Marvin would say, "No, I didn't do anything wrong." And but it killed him inside. He was depressed. I mean, it dragged on for more than a year, and I just watched this guy go to pieces. And it was just such a tragic ending, and I really had thought that when Marvin was doing this men-to-men program and was getting so much praise in the media, the NBA, the retired NBA Players Association had offered him a job to go around and talk to players about his experiences. And I talked to an official of that association, and the guy said, we thought that today's players could relate to Marvin rather than relate to some psychologist who never touched a basketball. And,
right.
Marvin could...
Don Newcomb did that in baseball for a long time, and it worked beautifully. He had a wonderful program going.
And Marvin was looking forward to it. He really was. And it just, when this thing came out, it ruined all his plans. And he was lost. And I think in the end he gave up. And, I think he just didn't see this thing resolving itself positively. And he was, once he went back on the drugs, even though he went to rehab, when he told me he was going back to Providence rather than coming back to my house, I realized that, I knew that it was just a bad sign because Marvin can't walk a block in Providence without bumping into some drug supplier. And I thought it was a big mistake, but, Marvin wanted to do this. His mother was in her 80s, and he was concerned about her health, and I believe that part. I just think that, once Marvin got down there, he was bound to run into the wrong people. And, it's just a tragedy, but, he was a good person. I really, I just think that, people ask me, do you think Marvin would have been better off had he gone to the Philadelphia 76ers instead of the ABA? And I can't answer that question, but I think he would have gotten more structure. The drug temptations certainly would have been there, but I honestly think that it was a mistake for him to go to the ABA, where it just the things that players got away with in the ABA were far greater than what you could get away with in the NBA.
There's a great book written, Tall Stories or Tall Balls.
I think it was. Loose Balls by Terry Pluto?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the one
Loose
about
Balls.
the ABA.
Loose Balls.
Yeah,
he wrote 2 books, one about the NBA and one
the
about...
The NBA was Tall Tales and the ABA was Loose Balls.
Okay. And,
well, Loose Balls is
got all
like an
kinds of anecdotes
encyclopedia.
in that book.
Yeah, it's a great book. It really is, and Terry did so much research on that, and it's a comical book too. I mean, and you have to laugh at the ABA and some of the things that occurred in that league, and you have to wonder how it could possibly last as long as it did, because owners would come and go, teams would come and go, and the promotions they ran were crazy, and the players were, it was a players league.
Incredibly talented players. I remember when they merged with the NBA, and the Hawks got Bill Bridges, Gene Tormo.
No, that was out of the ABL, Ralph, not the ABA.
Okay. Then,
but you're still right about when they merged. I mean, you had Artis Gilmore. He was the first player taken, and I think
came in with Denver. The 4 teams that came in with the Nets, the Pacers, the Spurs, and the Nuggets. Those are the 4 teams that came in from the NBA.
And did Doug Moe get to play in the NBA a little bit too at the end?
I think he was coaching.
I don't think so.
I think
I know he was coaching. Yeah, I know he coached.
I think when the merger took place, he became Larry Brown's assistant.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, they were North Carolina.
And then he eventually became coach at Denver, and
he's been a coach everywhere. Yeah.
And he loved the NBA. I mean, he said, he called the NBA style of play sludge ball, and and
he loved the ABA. You mean?
No. Doug Moe in the ABA would rail on the NBA style of play. He called it sludge ball.
Yes. But in favor of the ABA, of course.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, the ABA was like to basketball. It was like the AFL was to football. It was
exactly
almost
wide open offenses.
And it was wide open, and it was very entertaining for the fans.
Yeah, and of course the 3-point shot, which the NBA didn't use until 1981 because they thought it was too gimmicky, turned out to be the most popular aspect of the game even today.
And you still see those balls every now and again in schoolyards. Those
Absolutely.
red, white, and blue balls.
That's the bonus ball and the 3-point shooting contest is the red, white, and blue ball.
And that was actually the idea came from George Mikan, who was the first commissioner of the ABA, and he said somebody said we got to do something to distinguish our game ball from the NBA game ball. Somebody came up with the idea of red, white, and blue ball, and there were people that were against it. They said, as Terry Pluto said, it looked like it belonged on the nose of a seal.
The Harlem Globetrotters. Yes, on the seal. That's right. I remember that line.
The San Antonio Spurs.
But it also had.
Hey, that's a team called the Dallas Chaparrals. They started off life as a team called the Dallas Chaparrals, and the fact that they survived to get into the NBA was nothing short of miraculous.
Yes, exactly. Yep. I mean, the teams would change names. They changed cities.
Yeah.
Players didn't know if they were going to get a paycheck the next week. It was just craziness. I mean, trades were, they'd have these 10-player trades, and most of the money sounded great when you'd read about so and so getting a $6 million contract, but 90% of it would be deferred. And as Marvin said when he first signed his contract, he said, what happens if every team in the league goes bankrupt? Who's going to pay the 50% of my salary that's being deferred? And Marvin didn't want to sign it, but Bob Wolf said, "No, I'll make it guaranteed. I'll make sure it's guaranteed, Marvin," and Marvin signed it. But
Bob Wolf was a very talented guy, obviously, because he wrote the book with Connie Hawkins. And did you guys know him, Hal?
Sure, I knew him. Yeah.
What was he like?
He was a very suave guy and well-spoken, very friendly to the press, and one of the most successful agents of his era, without question.
He was. He ran into problems, and Derek Sanderson ended up trying to sue him because Sanderson found out that a couple of the investments that he had made, that were profitable investments, he claims he never got the money for. Derek today advises young players on how to handle their money, and of course Derek admits that he was an alcoholic during his playing career. Marvin, the same thing. Marvin didn't think he got very good advice from Bob Wolf and fired him about 3 months into his career. And then in the later days, after Bird had signed with Wolf, and of course the deal there was that Wolf did not take any commission. Where Wolf made his money was on Bird's endorsements. But he did not take a commission on Bird's salary, and that was one of the reasons why Bird went with Wolf over other agents. And then maybe 5 years after Bird had signed, 5 players, Robert Parrish and 3 other players that were fairly successful, all-stars, they all sued Wolf because Wolf was taking his commission off the top. And in the NBA, the agent's agreements clearly specifies that the commissions won't be paid until the player actually gets paid. So Wolf settled on that, but in the end, Wolf had very few NBA clients. And, Marvin didn't like him, and certainly Derek Sanderson, in the end, did not like him at all. And, smooth guy. When I covered the Celtics in the 80s, if I put in a call to Bob Wolf's office, I got a call back in the same day, always. He always was willing to talk to the press, and, very obliging, and I really liked the guy. I didn't know any of this stuff about Derek Sanderson's complaints and Marvin's complaints, and I found him, as a reporter, I found him to be a good source. And
exactly. I had the same experience with the guy. You said he would call you back the same day. Absolutely.
Yep.
He was always good that way. And for a reporter, that goes a long way to sealing a relationship. He was
you got a story and a deadline, and there's something there. You can't wait 2-3 weeks to set up an interview.
Exactly.
Well, and he had such a great reputation, at least, when I knew him, he did, because he had Jim Plunkett, he had Randy Vataha from the Patriots. He had some big names in every sport. He had Larry King. He did a lot of newscasters and celebrities. He had Marion Ross from Happy Days. He had a client list that would make any other agent envious. And of course, Bird was the big, when he signed Bird, he was a smart guy. He didn't take any commission for signing Bird, but the fact that he had Bird as a client brought him a ton of other clients. And, Bob knew the business, and he was a good negotiator, and people can't take that away from him. And I've heard Marvin's complaints about him, and I think knowing Marvin, I believe some of the stories Marvin tells, and others I think are a little far fetched. But but the guy wrote a book called Behind Closed Doors, and in the book he crucified Marvin. I mean, he talked about Marvin's irresponsibility and all the things that, and he only represented Marvin for 5 or 6 months, but one of the things that Wolf did was Wolf made him a series of loans when Marvin was in college, and whether that was legal or not, who knows? But Marvin went along with it, and he was getting $800 a month from Wolf while he was in school, and so
we know it was not legal. That was absolutely not legal in those days.
Right.
That was down payment on future earnings.
And Marvin paid back every nickel too, because when it was another reason why Marvin got in such a financial bind to begin with, because here's a guy that's only making $150,000 a year, because the other $150 is all in deferred. So he's making $150. That's before taxes, and he's got to pay back Wolf for the loans that he had taken, and he's broke. And along comes he's trying to figure out how he can make some extra money, and this gangster says to him. And what the gangster did is he was one of the largest marijuana smugglers in the country. And he was based in St. Louis. And he would fly in all these buyers from across the country, and he'd throw parties for them. And he'd have Marvin host the parties. And then he'd take these buyers and he'd bring them to spirits games, and Marvin would go out to dinner with these guys, and, these guys, he acted like he was their best friend for years. And it was great for this gangster's business, and Marvin would make some money on it, and he wasn't involved. Marvin was not involved in the sale of marijuana or anything like that, but he was their designated PR guy, is what it amounted to, and unfortunately,
that sounds like a good gig.
Well, it was, but the thing was, the access to drugs was just too easy for Marvin. And, it started out with marijuana, and then, he'd go to parties and there'd be cocaine there, and Marvin would have a little cocaine. And, like I say, in the space of his second year, in the space of those 10 months, Marvin became an addict. And, he never broke out of it while he was, he never even tried to break his addiction while he was a player. In '85, he got and Marvin hadn't played basketball for a year and a half. He gets a call from Bill Walton, and Walton's living in San Diego, and he wants Marvin to fly out there and work with him because the Clippers, Walton's team, had given Walton permission to seek a trade on his own, and the Celtics were interested. And Walton called Marvin up, and he said, "Can you come out and work with me and get me into shape?" And Marvin did, and I asked Walton, I said, how come you chose Marvin? You had all these, you knew Marvin hadn't played for a year and a half. You had all these other guys, all these other pros out in San Diego. Why Marvin? And he said, because Marvin was the one guy I knew who would never back down from me, and he's going to push me. And he said, I never thought of anybody else but Marvin. And it worked out well. I mean, Walton went to the Celtics and got a championship ring the next year. But when Walton left for Boston, he gave Marvin $1,000 and, said, if you need anything, give me a call. And he put him up at a Marriott hotel on the ocean for a couple weeks. But when the the couple weeks it ended, Marvin had taken the $1,000 and bought cocaine with it. And for the next 2 years, Marvin was homeless in East San Diego, which is not anything resembling San Diego. It's the pits of the area. And,
like East St. Louis.
Yes. And Marvin ended up just homeless. And at one time he was sleeping on a mattress in a burned out house that had no roof, and he shared the house with some Mexican illegal immigrants, and they would offer him food, and Marvin had no appetite. And he said it was so bad. He said, I looked like one of these starving kids you see in UNICEF ads. My shorts would slip on down to my ankles because I had lost so much weight. And he eventually his mother finally sent somebody out to rescue him and got him out of San Diego, and he went down to Houston and got sober at John Lucas's rehab, and it was doing great. Lucas offered him a job as a counselor, and he was working with Roy Tarpley, who was a former Sixth Man of the Year in the NBA, and Richard Dumas, who was a very talented young guy, both of whom had drug problems, and Marvin was doing a great job. And Tarpley, who had been banned indefinitely by the NBA, was trying to make a comeback in the CBA in Wichita Falls. And Lucas called Marvin in one day and said, Marvin, would you go to Wichita Falls and try to help Roy? He's climbing the walls, and if somebody doesn't babysit him, he's going to go back to drugs. So Marvin went to the airport.
To do this.
Well, Marvin had been sober for almost a year, and he had been very effective as a counselor. And so Marvin went to the airport and missed the plane, the only plane going to Wichita Falls that day. And on his way home, he was so nervous about blowing his first out-of-town assignment for Lucas, they stopped off at a bar and had a couple shooters. And that was all Marvin needed. And he was back to the drugs. And, ended up a year later being caught by police with selling cocaine, and served 2 years and 9 months in a Texas prison, and never really recovered. Just a sad story, because all these events at some point, had he taken another option, had he not done this or not done that or gotten help, it could have changed his whole life. But again, I mean, that power of addiction. And I don't think Marvin's an unusual story. I think he obviously, because who he was and all the crazy stories that surround Marvin, were well known. But in reality, there are so many people that, when 50,000 people are going to die from overdoses next year, this country has a problem. And, people have said to me, geez, I loved your book, but I didn't like the ending. And I said, well, addiction doesn't have that many happy endings. I mean, there are people that, like Gus Gerard, who turn their lives around, like Chris Herron, who was a great college player and played in the NBA and had a terrible cocaine problem, but managed to turn his life around, and today does many of the things that Marvin hoped to do. I mean, he does speak to different players. He does go to high schools and talks to these kids and gets through to these kids about drugs. And, there are some success stories. And there's a great book on Chris Herron called Basketball Junkie. And, it's a tremendous book. But in the case of Marvin, I thought that it was necessary to just bang. I mean, the book ends abruptly with Marvin dying, but that's what addiction does. I mean, you're here one day, and the next day you can die of an overdose, and it happens all too often, and the problem is just getting worse. I mean, I read just today that there were 101 cases in 4 days of overdoses in Louisville. And this problem is not getting better; it's getting worse. And I think it's a story that if people read it and realize, how it can wreck lives, it might have some good good message there.
Yeah, all those celebrities and musicians and folks that died coincidentally in 1 year last year. There was a whole pile of them that had abused coke and other drugs for years and years and years. It's a social thing. It's not just entertainment industry. It's not just sports. It's a day-to-day successful people look for designer drugs. I want to clear something up. Marijuana, because just the flow of the conversation, the way it was put into context, marijuana is not a gateway drug. Just throwing that out there. And if anything, I'll quote Willie Nelson. If it's a gateway drug, it better hurry up.
Yeah.
But it isn't. And
no, and I didn't mean to imply that it was.
No, you didn't.
This guy was one of the biggest marijuana smugglers. What his group did was I understand, but don't worry about Marvin. Maybe he had a hit or two. That wasn't going to ruin his program. That wasn't what ruined it. Let's just put it that way. No, but in his role in that organization where he was hosting these parties, the access to cocaine was there. I mean, you'd walk in and there'd be a mound of cocaine on the dining room table, and
Yes, from that standpoint, you're absolutely right. The temptation to at least try it, don't mind if I do, kind of thing, is always there. Hey, thank you. For this, Mr. Carey. I hope you're going to be coming back sometime soon to visit us again. Would you? Beautiful. I didn't catch the hockey thing. I've never had a show with hockey in Comfortably Zoned. Putting together this network of different shows, and I'm thrilled for that because I was a big hockey fan as a kid growing up, a Ranger fan when it was the original six. And so come back, we'll talk hockey. And Hal, tell me about your books coming out. Tell folks who may not have
out a week today, the 21st. It's called Banned Baseball's Blacklist of All-Stars and also-rans. And it was a fun book to research and to write, because some of the stories, they're not as good as the stories that Mike has been telling, but they're darn good stories. They're interesting stories about players who got in trouble with the leagues and wound up having to be suspended or thrown out of the game for life. And the most popular story, of course, is the Black Sox. The 1919 World Series was thrown, and just an interesting examination of the people who were involved and what drove them to do what they did. And sometimes the guys who were suspended was an overreaction on the part of the commissioner, Judge Landis. Sometimes he just looked the other way. So it's kind of I think it's a very interesting read, and I enjoyed doing it.
Beautiful. Exciting. It's coming out. I'm going to ask both of you before we get off the air, what's your next project, Mr. Carey, after the book on Marvin?
I don't know. I'm debating that. I I've been asked if I'd be interested in writing a biography about Danny Ainge, and it interests me. I mean, here's a guy that was a two-sport All-American in high school and played for the Blue Jays and went for the Celtics and coached. Now he's known as Trader Dan because of all the trade he's made as the Celtics GM, and he's in position now with holding Brooklyn's #1 draft pick. I think they're a player away from being a championship team, but they're second in the East, and with that one player next year, I think they'll be in a position to contend for the title. So it's a project I think I'm going to try to tackle. But
good. I'd like to learn about him.
This is a 6-year project because every time I thought I had the book completed, Marvin it was a new Marvin story, so I had to redo the book. But again, I'm proud of this book. I think it has a good message to it, and the first half is all about Marvin and his crazy adventures in basketball, and the second half is about his battle with addiction, which I think carries a pretty good message.
I want to ask you, is there anything that you're sorry you put in and wish you'd have left out? And is there anything that you wish you would have put in and you're sorry you left out? Or the other way around? You know what I'm saying?
No, I will say this. Marvin read 95% of the book. He wanted to, and it was not a flattering book when it comes to the addiction parts. And some of the things that Marvin did to get drug money, and living as a homeless person for 2 years in San Diego and a year and a half in Houston, and he wanted people to learn by his mistakes, and he read 95% of the book. The only part he didn't read are the final 2 chapters and the epilogue, and so he was very cooperative. He was very frank. He was very open. And, he said, as long as it's the truth, I don't mind if it's in the book. And, he wanted the book to be of help to people. And, obviously the ending of the book is not what he wanted, but.
No, but from that standpoint, it is a happy ending. If he wanted people to be helped from it, that makes it on some levels, of course, makes it a happy ending. And if it helps people, if it helps one person, that kind of thing.
That's my goal. And I've heard from addiction counselors who said they've recommended this book to coaches and to players in college, so that makes me feel good about the book, because I'm really satisfied as and again, I struggled with this book for 6 years trying to portray Marvin in an honest way. There's no getting around it that I was a friend of the guys, but on the other hand, Marvin wanted to be honest, and he was willing to tell all the things that he did in his life that were wrong, and he wanted kids to understand, as he told a bunch of kids at a assembly, a high school assembly. He said, I was a dope, I was an idiot. And he said he told one story, and if you have a minute, I'll tell it. He was a neighbor of his had a son who was shot in the head with a bullet, and the neighbor asked Marvin if he would go and visit the kid in the hospital. And when Marvin got there, the kid was obviously in a coma. He had a bullet in his brain. And Marvin looked down, and on the kid's arm was a tattoo that said Bug Life. And Marvin said, he's talking to these 1,000 kids in this school assembly, and Marvin said, Thug Life is a game that's designed for you to lose. And he said, when they found this kid, he had $700 in his pocket. And Marvin said, it was probably drug money. And he said, what's the kid going to do with that $700 now that he's sitting there, in a coma? And Marvin had a way of getting his message across to kids, and that's the shame of it. That's the shame of him relapsing and eventually dying, is that he did reach kids, and there was no BS with Marvin. He told, he wasn't afraid just to recount all the mistakes he made in life. And his philosophy was, if I can reach one kid, I've done a good job. And, that's what I tried to get across in this book.
Yeah. He also said that he was self-effacing and could laugh at himself. That's a big quality. That is a nice
way to go, Ralph.
Okay.
And I think that characteristic is why.
Okay, Alan.
Can you close it?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for everything, Alan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, I'm just happy with the book, and like I say, I mean, it's done fairly well, and I hope people will read it. I mean, younger kids, anybody 30 and under is not going to know who the heck Marvin Barnes was. I mean, they may have heard the name, but I don't think they realize what a great talent he was. And, I think this book, reflects what a great, awesome talent he was as a basketball player. And, again, I mean...
you're able to convey that in an interview very, very well. Thank you so much. Before I close, I do want to ask Hal Bock the same question that I asked you. What do you got next? What's in the hopper for you, sir?
Rest and recuperation. Relaxing. I don't have anything on my plate right now. Just a little
that I'm glad then that you could take out some stuff on this show and get some it's a little cathartic sometimes, a show like this, especially when you don't have the brain going for anything else, because rest and recuperation
right.
for an avid mind doesn't last very long. You'll if you got 14 books, you say, you'll be working on number 15 before too long. I can guarantee you that.
Not if my wife has anything to say about it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's to be determined, isn't it?
That's
and
right.
Not a subject for Valentine's Day.
There you go.
So wish her a happy Valentine's Day for giving you
sure
the
will.
time to be on this show. And again, thank you both, and thank Al Blumkin, who had to leave a little early. Terrific as usual. And next week we will be back, same time, same bat station, as Alan says. Here's a better way of saying it, of course. To those of you out there, keep on keeping on. Life is a journey, and enjoy the oasis. Have a great one, and catch you on the flip-flop. Bye, gentlemen.
Good night.
Goodbye, Ralph. My Hal.